of Minnesota, USA. So we are very glad this evening to have all the participants with us. This evening we have as our speaker Dr. Carlin Ekman, whom I will introduce with you later after we have a welcome address from our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R.S. Sambasivarao. So we thank you, our Vice Chancellor, sir, for being with us again, sir. So through your kind uh, participation and support, we are able to hold this second lecture series again in our webinar series. So I would like to invite you, sir, to have the welcome address. The time is yours, sir.
Thank you, Professor John. Uh, I, I also thank Professor Karlin Ekman for accepting our invitation to give a webinar to our participants and also to our faculty members, students, and research scholars. And a very pertinent topic to Mizoram. So it gives the experiences of understanding the changes in indigenous farming systems and uh, the livelihood experiences from East Africa, East Asia, and Sub-Sahara Africa. It was also quite relevant to our Mizoram because Mizoram also has got different uh, different air conditions like tropical, humid, and also subtropical zones at different places. Not that much changes are there, but it is having, and also hilly areas and plain areas and sloping areas. So it will be very relevant to our Mizoram, particularly livelihood issues and changes in the farming pattern. As all of us know, that Mizoram has got mostly Zoom cultivation, which is being practiced, shifting cultivation, it is also called. And there are certain disadvantages in the pollution-wise, which is also creating because of the burning and cropping them. But natural succession is not getting affected in forest area because natural succession is taking place in the couple of years where the grazing has been taken place. And it was biodiversity has been well maintained because of that particular Zoom cultivation, though it has got little disadvantage of having the pollution because of the burning of the particular plants. Mostly it is cultivated through rice crop. And also, because of the issue of the land, it will be always good to have different modern trends of cultivation, and which is also will be very good if we can go for that is cultivation of modern trends, which can be cultivated in the uh, minimum spaces like hydroponic cultivation. And that kind of cultivation also will be very good in particularly hilly areas and northeast areas where this kind of cultivation is very important. So with your experience, you can also guide and you can give your experiences in South Asia and Southeast Asia and also in the African farming systems, which pattern will be very good for our Mizoram cultivation. But at present, they are going mostly for Zoom cultivation in paddy cultivation. And also some horticulture crops are being grown in several areas. And what kind of cultivation it can be shifted, and also it can be very well modernization with protecting the indigenous techniques. This is how Mizoram is very much interested. We don't want to go for Mizoram people. We don't want to go for too much modernization and technological interventions in cultivation, but we wanted to improve the traditional cultivation with the modernizing techniques or indigenous models. So it will be very good if you can able to throw a light on this particular aspect, how Mizoram cultivation can be improved with the modernization of the indigenous techniques and how Zoom cultivation or shifting cultivation can be improved and further methods can be implemented in Mizoram. It will be very good for us. And it will be because many people, they can even take up some ideas from your lecture and also can implement in research and also propagate to the farmers in Mizoram and other parts of Northeast region. So I once again thank you very much for joining us and giving us a wonderful opportunity to listen to you and to know about the modern indigenous techniques, for indigenous farming techniques for hilly areas and Northeast Asian and other farming zones. Thank you very much. Over to John. I thank you all the organizing committee for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor for gracing this occasion and giving us the welcome address again, and also shedding some light into the indigenous issues in this part of the world. Sir, thank you. So before I invite Carlin Ekman, our speaker for tonight's talk, I would like to give a little bit of a detail into her biodata. Carlin Ekman is an educator and researcher with 35 years of experience in natural resources research and management in Asia, North America, and Africa. She has designed, managed, and evaluated a variety of interdisciplinary natural resources management programs and projects. Her areas of expertise include curriculum development, vulnerability assessment, community forestry, agroforestry, the human dimensions of natural resource use, evaluation research, and farming systems research. So, since 1995, she is an adjunct professor at the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Management at the University of Minnesota. And she has research interests in the various types associated with natural resources management and with the tribal communities in Minnesota and Southeast Asia. She has been the coordinator of a 12-member international team working in Mizoram, Northeast India. And she also lead a project on research on tribal communities in the Indo-Burmese border along with their farming practices. She was a Fulbright Nehru Award to India from 2014 up to 2016, and she had research on natural resource management and land use and farming systems in Mizoram, India. We had been very fortunate to have worked with her during her fellowship here, as well as her project work here. She was a research associate at the Water Resource Center in the University of Minnesota from 2006 to 2013, and she was the international expert team leader. She led in the Mekong River Commission Secretariat. She led a six-person international team in the vulnerability assessment on the lower Mekong Basin countries of Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. She also developed a research methodology that is utilized in the first ever basin-wide sociological survey. She was also the chief technical advisor to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And she was the CTA, Chief Technical Advisor, for the 1.6 million US dollar budget, which was a project on women irrigation and nutrition in Cambodia, Nepal, and Zambia. Maybe it was because of her United Nations connections that the Mizoram University team, including even myself, also was able to have a project with the Food and Agriculture Organization in the year 2017 and 18. Yeah, Carlin, we are very much thankful to you. We know your part in that role as well. And then she is an independent research consultant from 1986 to 2008 on evaluation, environmental conservation, and poverty reductions programs in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, where she is involved in the work with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the ILO, the European Union, and the UNDP along with American Refugee Committee, World Cocoa Foundation, and many others. Her country assignments, which is very noteworthy, include India, Nepal, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Rwanda, Tanzania, Lesotho, Zambia, Malawi, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Nigeria, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and others. So she holds a PhD in forest resources and watershed management from the University of Minnesota, and she holds two master's degree, master's in science in forest resource and watershed management, as well as master's in arts in international economics and development. She has several other diplomas and other academic laurels, which may be too long for me to all read out. She is able to speak French, Spanish, Italian, sorry, and Swedish. So I will not further go on regarding the various accomplishments. We are very thankful for having Carlin with us. She has been very resourceful for initiating the MOA between the University of Minnesota and the Mizoram University. She has been there since the beginning, and she's still playing a very much pivotal role in our collaboration work till today. She has been the editor of the collaborative work on 3 volumes of book focusing on natural resource management in the Eastern Himalayas. So, without much ado, I will invite Carlin to take her time. Carlin, please.
Thank you so much, John, for the introduction, and I'm honored to be here this evening. Professor Rao, I'm very honored to meet you for the first time. It's quite an honor. And I'm delighted to have so many of our colleagues and friends from around the world tuning in tonight. So I bid you all hello from St. Paul, Minnesota, the other side of the world where it's very hot and very sunny today. So thank you again for the invitation. I'm going to try to share my screen at this point, and I have a presentation that I would like to go through. And if you have questions, I think we're going to do a question and answer session at the end. And I invite you to make comments in the chat section, please. So without further ado, we'll start. And I'm going to share my screen at this point. All right. So I trust you can see this.
Yes, Carlin.
Okay. Very good. All right, so the topic this evening is understanding changes in indigenous farming systems and livelihoods, some lessons from East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm going to show you a few examples from cases and studies where I've worked in the past. Oh, no, this will not advance, so I'm going to have to go back and reload this because it's not wanting to move forward. So let me just reduce this. Sorry for the technical issue here. It seems to be stuck. Okay, there we go. All right, so the presentation outline will be, we'll do just a very short history of the collaboration between Mizoram University and the University of Minnesota. Just very, very brief. Some of you may not know that history. And then we'll talk about why it's important to understand indigenous livelihoods and farming systems. And then how to measure changes in those systems. And then throughout the talk, I'll give some examples. And ideally, we'd like to have a discussion, but because we're meeting through Zoom, we won't be able to do a discussion, but I invite you to put your comments in the chat session or section. So the history of the Mizoram-Minnesota partnership, it began about a decade ago with the visit of Chongthu Chongnuna from the PH&ED department of the government of Mizoram to Minnesota. He was a visiting Fulbrighter, and we spent several months with him learning about water issues in the state of Mizoram. Water conveyance, water sanitation, the fact that there was either too much or too little water. And it was really challenging to understand from that distance what was going on with water in Mizoram. So he returned to Mizoram, and shortly thereafter, the government invited 4 of us, the faculty at University of Minnesota, to come to Mizoram and do a land and water assessment, which we began in late 2012, early 2013. We were there for several months, and we traveled all over Mizoram with the exception of Champai. And we were fortunate to meet with probably thousands of farmers. We traveled to many, many dozens of villages, walked over hill and dale, and were able to see a number of sites. And during this first visit, our team met with Mizoram University faculty. And a while later, we ended up with a memorandum of understanding, which my colleague Dean Current worked on. And we identified a number of areas of mutual interest that we would like to work on together. And all of our faculty were drawn from different disciplines, from public administration, forestry, watershed management, hydrology, mycology. So we had a number of different areas of interest. And as we got to know each other and we began our work in the field, we learned a lot from each other. So this collaboration has been very, very interesting and informative and very collegial, I must add. And so far, now we're approaching a decade. We've had a number of international symposia at Mizoram University in Minnesota, and with our newest partner, Kohima Science College in Nagaland. And of course, COVID has put a stop to a lot of our work, but we fully intend to move forward as soon as we are able to do so. We've done a number of academic exchanges and hosting in both directions. We've done lots of original hands-on field research. We've published 3 books, and we've now, as I mentioned, expanded with our partnership with Kohima Science College.
Carlin,
Yes.
can I just interrupt? We cannot see your slide.
You cannot see the slides?
Yes, your presentation is not visible.
I'm so sorry. I cannot tell that, but I will try to correct that. Why is it not?
If not, our system analyst is here. I think he can, he said he can help you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Let me try to share this again. Let's see.
Or Carlin, if it is a problem, you can just send through WhatsApp our group, ZOSAP WhatsApp group. Then we can just pass it on to our system.
I think I
in
already
charge.
have it in my mail. I'll check.
All right, all right.
Last time, yeah, we did the same.
Yeah.
I projected Dean's presentation from my laptop, and from across the other side of the globe,
Oh my
Jean
goodness.
presented, and I
Okay.
controlled the slides from my end.
Okay, so can I,
Sometimes it happens.
let me try to forward this to you. Actually,
I've
Tanpui,
got
I
it.
already sent you. I sent
Yes,
you the
I've got it. So I'll send it to
I know
the person
you can just
concerned.
No, PTP, you can do yourself.
project it from your
You
end.
can share.
PTP.
Oh, okay.
You can project Ralte from your side.
Yes, sir.
Just share the you save your the save PPT and desktop.
Right, sir.
Yes.
So this happened with Dean as well? This is very strange.
Dean was also experiencing that problem earlier, not this time, but earlier last year.
Okay.
Yeah. So I operated from my end the whole presentation, and he spoke from there. So
Well, my sincere apologies to everyone. This is a little surprising. It should be able to share it, but
sometimes I think the issue, there is a problem in your Mac laptop, I think Apple Mac.
yeah, I'm using a
Maybe.
Dell
I
right
don't
now.
know.
I'm using a PC, so it should share.
Is it coming?
No.
Not yet. I see you, TP, but I don't see the presentation.
Somehow I can't seem to share it. I'll just send it to Suraj. Okay. Suraj, can I send it to you? Because I can't share from my screen.
Or you can send it to John also, PTP.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Hmm.
Maybe I can try one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Let's see. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
It's
Yes,
coming.
yes,
Oh, good.
visible
Okay.
now.
All right.
Carlin, it's good enough. You can just do not go to the full screen. I would like to advise that you don't go to the full screen, but you may zoom the slide a bit if you want.
Okay, so should I leave it on this particular view?
Yeah, that also
Okay.
is good.
Okay. All right, so let's continue then. Why is it important to understand Indigenous livelihoods? And it's because Indigenous people live everywhere. They are all around us. They live in our societies. There are Indigenous people across the world. And yet our governments make policy decisions that affect them on a host of issues, whether it be population growth or environmental issues or climate change. And they make these decisions on behalf of their constituents and behalf of local people. And their policies are based upon assumptions about how people behave and about their economic activities. But sometimes those assumptions may be based on inaccurate information or bias. In fact, in Minnesota, where I live, we have a very large number of tribal people here who are Native Americans. And there's a lot of racism and bias that affects how governments interact with Indigenous people. So different populations are affected differently by policies. Policies are not neutral in how they affect local people. So if we look around the world, there are Indigenous people everywhere, every continent, just about every country. My own family comes from the extreme north of Scandinavia, and my grandfather was a Sami tribal person. So he was an Indigenous person. They typically herd reindeer, and they're hunters, so they hunt seals, and they are fishermen. So he was Indigenous, but I cannot say that I am because I did not grow up in that culture. But nevertheless, there are Indigenous people everywhere. And what does it mean to be Indigenous? Well, Indigenous people retain very distinct cultural, social, linguistic characteristics that are different from the dominant societies in which they live. They are typically the original people, original inhabitants of a place, and they have a deep, deep knowledge of the land and the water where they live. And so we have to acknowledge their Indigenous technical knowledge, you could say, and their deep traditions. Who is Indigenous? Well, people who self-identify as Indigenous. I mentioned my grandfather. He self-identified as Indigenous, but I cannot because I did not grow up in that culture. Indigenous people occupy a place before a colonial government or another culture comes to that location, and they tend to become minority populations. They have strong links, as I mentioned, to their local environment. They tend not to be the dominant group, and because of their self-identity, they resolve to keep their traditions going and to pass on their traditions and their language to the next generation. So indigenous people may, as I mentioned, may not be the dominant culture. And politicians and government officials who are not indigenous may not have a good understanding of their livelihoods. And when they set policies and plans and programs without a good understanding, they can cause more harm than good for indigenous groups. And when they make their budgets, it means that they might be spending money on programs that are not as effective as they should be in reaching the entire population. For example, on this slide, the photograph comes from Somalia, where people are nomadic pastoralists. And I'll say a bit more about this in a minute, but government policies have really overlooked these nomadic people. In Ghana, Ghana is a former British colony. And even though they gained independence at about the same time, shortly after the Indian independence, the British colonial model of
One moment,
government.
Carlin,
Yes.
Carlin, 1 minute. Can you try to see whether if it works on full screen, that presentation?
Yes, sure.
Can you put on the full screen to see if nothing happens?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
fine.
screen
Good,
now.
good, good. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
super.
Okay.
Great. All right. So this example, this is a cocoa farmer from Ghana, northern Ghana. In Ghana, almost all of the farming is done by women, and especially in the northern part. But because they inherited this British colonial model of development, government officials even today assume that farmers are men and not women. And so therefore the extension services target men as the heads of households. But in fact, indigenous women do most of the work, especially for export crops like cocoa and fruits and bananas and that sort of thing. So the extension investments that are made by the government are not very effective because it is targeted toward men who do not necessarily pass along those resources and information to the people, the real farmers, who are the women. So here we have the introduction of a gender component to policy and planning. And here's another example from Zambia, again, a former British colony where government officials assume that farmers are men, and men are targeted with extension support. And there's also the British colonial assumption that families are monogamous, meaning one husband and one wife. However, in Zambia and so many other countries, polygamy is normal. So that means that one husband might have many wives. And when you target agricultural resources toward men, it's missing the actual farming, the farmers and those who actually do the work. So again, the investment in agricultural extension and resources is wasted. This is a very interesting example. This comes from a place called Chipapa in Zambia. In this culture, males control all property through inheritance. So they also, given the situation with polygamy, they have very large families. In the upper photo, I think you can count 11 women in the background. There are actually 14 women who are all co-wives. They are all married to the same man. And they have in total over 60 children. And girls from a very young age are trained in agriculture. And women are the primary farmers. They're the ones who use the fuel wood, who work in water supply and sanitation. And again, government programs target men and not the agricultural producers. So there's a big gap here in really having an effective system that gets information to the people who really need it. Another example from Somalia, you saw this photo a few minutes ago. Somali people, for the most part, are nomadic. They herd camels, goats, and sheep. And they have a very ancient culture and way of life. They are presumed to be backward and primitive. They have a high rate of illiteracy, but yet they're very efficient in terms of their survival strategies and how they use the land. And all across Africa, through the Sahel into East Africa, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Tanzania, governments try to get nomadic people to resettle and to become farmers. But these programs fail because people don't know how to farm. Their tradition is to be nomadic. And when they are forced to be resettled and to farm, they fail and they become hungry because they don't have enough resources or support to be successful. Another example from the Mekong Basin, under the influence of China, there is a very significant push to construct dams on the upper Mekong River for the creation of hydropower. And government thinking is that this will create jobs. But as you put in large dams and then the smaller wing dams, this affects the flow of water. So in the lowlands, in the shorelines, in the marshes, the water dries up. And that's where local people, indigenous people, go to collect their food resources. So things like snails and clams, crabs, shrimp, turtles, eels, and fish are what people eat. That's their subsistence diet. But as these marshes dry up because of dam creation, they lose their livelihoods, they lose their food supply. And so the result can be really devastating. This is a map of the Mekong River, and you can see China in the upper right. And there are very many tributaries that drain from the surrounding countries into the Mekong. So the lower Mekong Basin is shared by Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. And this is what happens when you have even smaller dams created. On the upper left, this is a wing dam, and it's got a series of devices that withhold water above the dam. And there are engineers that control when these dams open and close. But people who live downstream don't have any knowledge about when the water will stop or when it comes back. And when the gates are opened, there's tremendous erosion that happens along the riverbanks. And as you can see, there's erosion in all of these cases here where people's gardens along the shoreline are swept away. In the upper right, this was a bridge in a small community that was swept away when the floodgates were opened. Even in rice and paddy fields, there can be significant erosion. And finally, there's loss of species. The fisherman who is balanced on this wing dam is casting a net, and we watched him for quite a while, and he came up empty-handed each time, and finally he caught a Mekong catfish. But this is really causes a lot of hardships for people when they're not consulted and when governments don't have enough information about people's livelihoods in these rural areas. And so sometimes these policies can really threaten Indigenous people. Given our discussion of the last few slides, this is really a telling photograph here because this is a World Bank official on the right, and he has been aiding these farmers with agricultural support, but there are no women in this photograph, and women do farming as well as men. So there are different levels here of attention, of gaps that need to be filled. If governments don't have the right information about who is doing the farming and how they are farming, that can cause problems. So how do you measure changes in livelihoods and farming systems? First of all, it's important to use multiple methods. If you only use one method, like some kind of a social survey, you'll only get incomplete information. And it's really important to use a participatory approach where the farmers or the people in indigenous cultures are directly involved in the research. And there are many, many ways to do this. How do you start? Well, first of all, work with somebody who already has a lot of knowledge and experience and who can help your group to learn about doing these research methods. In my own work, I've used the CAP study, just called Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices, and Participatory Farming Systems Research. I don't have the time to describe these in any detail, but suffice it to say that I was trained as a technical person in watershed management, hydrology, and forestry. And I came to appreciate years ago that where there is a problem, the technical side, the formulas and the biophysical measurements will not help you to solve it. You really have to understand people and how they behave and why they use a resource in the way that they do. That's why indigenous knowledge is so important. So when using a mixed method, it's really common for a team to use methods from different disciplines. And in our work with Mizoram University, we drew from economics and agriculture, public administration, mycology, and we all learned from each other. This is a very rich and interesting way to do research. So it's interdisciplinary and it's participatory because you're interacting directly with local people. So you get a data set that can help you to understand what is happening in a local community. And that can contribute to better policy and planning decisions. And you can also use this data for evaluation and to learn about the impact of a program or a policy. And so finally, I'll turn to Mizoram very, very briefly without spending much time on this, but our team was drawn from multiple disciplines and we worked together. We each looked at a problem from our own disciplinary perspective. We talked about it. We learned a lot from each other. And we conducted research on Jum cultivation, as well as other things, but Jum was the most important thing that we looked at. We know that many governments in the Eastern Himalayas have focused on eliminating Jum. They feel that it's destructive, it causes deforestation. And in Mizoram for a long time, the policy has been to distribute goods to farmers to try to convince them to stop Juming, distribute pigs and chickens and other things. But this is very risky for farmers. This is their tradition. Their festivals, their livelihoods depend upon the Jum cycle. And it's very closely tied to their local communities. So they can't just stop without doing something else. Now, I'm not able to pronounce this, and maybe John or Tampu, you can help me pronounce this word.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
let me do it. Tom ngay na.
Thank you.
Tom ngay na, Zonuna. It's from Zonuna.
Thank you. Good. So this is a really wonderful concept that you take care of each other. Basically, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's the duty of every Mizo person to help poor people, to help each other out. It's a sense of mutual cooperation and responsibility. And I hope I've described that correctly. So please tell me if I haven't. But I found this, it's really unique to Mizoram, and maybe there are other sorts of concepts in other parts of the world, but I find this to be extraordinary in Mizoram. And yet, so people help each other out when they carry out Juming activities during the year, but yet governments have assumed that Jum is destructive and that combined with population growth, it's going to lead to less fallow and more deforestation. And government policies have repeated this assumption. But yet there's no data, there's no proof nobody really knows for sure whether or not Joom is destructive, at least in the case of Mizoram. So there are big data gaps. We don't know much about Joom cycles, about fallow patterns. There hasn't been much independent evaluation. And FAO says that Mizoram is a data-free zone just because there is so little data. I mean, really good, valid data that's been collected in a firsthand way. So you don't have any data, so what? Why is that important? Well, you can't manage what you can't measure. You can't evaluate the impacts of policies and programs without good data. So data becomes the evidence for project success or failure. And because we don't have that, there's a need for more and better data to support natural resources management. So very briefly, I know I'm running short of time here. What we did was to do a literature review, a very interesting book by Daman Singh, the only really firsthand data about Joom that was done in the early 1990s. We did a gap exercise, what don't we know? We did field studies, we did a CAP study, all of these other activities. We put together all of our information and we put our heads together and tried to make sense of it. What we found out was that by comparing our data at Daman Singh's sites, we found a very significant transformation taking place. People are still practicing Joom, of course they are, but they're also adopting more intensive production systems. They're adopting higher value agricultural and horticultural crops, and the fallow cycles are getting longer and not shorter. Forest cover seems to improve. But they're not having much extension support, and they are adapting and innovating on their own. And I want to just briefly show you some examples. And in most of these photographs, you can still see Joom cultivation and intact forests in the background. But these are intensive production systems, quite small, but these are bringing farmers quite a lot of income. The photograph on the right, the hill in the background, is a hill completely covered with pumpkins, scaffolding for pumpkins. And this farmer has installed a dairy and a number of other activities. So there's a lot of combinations that we discovered throughout the state of Mizoram, and people are really innovative and experimenting a lot. And one farmer told us that I can earn more in 3 months producing vegetables than a full year of Joom cultivation. So we are seeing a lot of transformation, and our research is really just started. There's a lot more to discover and a lot more to learn. So just to sum up a few quick points, the entire Eastern Himalayan region is experiencing population growth, climate change, lots of other pressures, and that farmers are adapting on their own, but they need information and training, and their information needs are not being met. It's an exciting time, I think, for producers, but also for researchers and farmers. There's a lot to be learned from this. And Indigenous people around the world are really resourceful and innovative, contrary to the view that they are backward and primitive. That is not at all the case. In my work, in my experience, I've found that they are very adaptive and resourceful, but they have not been adequately involved in decision-making, and they've been largely overlooked especially by national governments. We found that they are willing participants in research and in creating solutions. So at this point, I know we can't have an open discussion, but if you would like to put in comments in the chat column about what changes have you witnessed in your own work in terms of Indigenous practices, please, I invite you to do that at this time. And I'd like to stop and thank you all very, very much for your kind attention. And I really appreciate this opportunity be with you all tonight and to share these ideas. So I'm going to rejoin you now and leave the PowerPoint. And
before I give Zonuna the chair, I would like to thank Carlin. Yeah, I think you have given a very concise introduction into the issue of livelihood here, comparing them with those of Africa, Asia, and then in the context of Mizoram. Thank you so much. There are a number of questions already. Some of them are there that are appreciating your presentation, as well as some questions are there in the chat box as well. So I will give the time to Zonuna to take over the session.
I just add one point, Dr. John. There are people from Nepal, and one Kandel is a biotechnology professor. He joined in the webinar, and also University of Hyderabad and Nehu. Many professors joined. Very senior most professor, Professor Amanvi Prasad, Professor of Environmental Science and Life Sciences from University of Hyderabad. He also joined, and one professor from Nepal, Kathmandu University. And I just saw some messages, in chat box. So this is for information, just.
Yes, sir. We are so thankful to them. Yes, sir.
And University of Delhi, Nehu, Biswajit, when Biswajit, Professor Biswajit is also there. And Biswajit has posted me one question. He was saying that the Professor Carolyn has given a very good presentation, and he was asking, so what is that follow-up action and implementation strategy is going to be developed with the help of Carolyn's lecture? What is that you are proposing for Northeast region? He was posed a question to me personally. For Northeast, Jonana, Professor Carlin, he was asking me, what is the follow-up action you suggest for Northeast region to develop the indigenous techniques for improvement and further modification of the techniques? He posted in my WhatsApp, actually.
Thank you so much. My suggestion, because I'm an educator and because I do research, my suggestion really is to do more research on how people farm. Who does the farming? How do they do it? What constraints and what issues are they encountering? And to base government programs and extension outreach on the gaps that the research identifies. Certainly there are many, many gaps. We all encounter those, but being able to base policies, programs, and plans on the reality of life in the rural areas is so important, I think.
Actually,
so better
yes, sir. Please continue. I thought it is finished. Please continue.
No, my point was just a better linking of research and policy.
Yes. Actually, one person is asking very nice point. In your place, you have Zoom cultivation. He was asking, Om Prakash.
That's a very interesting question. We have many indigenous people in my place, Minnesota. Many of them are Native American people. So we have Ojibwe and Dakota people. The Dakota live in a prairie, so they are buffalo herders and they are more livestock pastoralists, whereas the Ojibwe people live in the forests and they are hunter-gatherers. However, we in the last 20 or 30 years have received hundreds of thousands of refugees from Southeast Asia. And most of these are people from Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. So we have so many Hmong and Vietnamese people, and also from Myanmar. And they practiced Jum at one time, but since that time, while they're here, they've now converted to very intensive agriculture and agroforestry. And they become commercial farmers. They have tiny, small farms, but they raise a wide variety of crops, specialty crops on those farms.
I leave it to Dr. Jonana. Before that, I just one more professor. He's an English professor. He was suggesting to all of us, why don't you implement a training program for the indigenous people in Northeast region to have these indigenous techniques to be imparted, which were explained by the speaker. So Carlin, and it will be very good, no, the techniques which have been implemented in Africa and other Asian countries. If that kind of training is been implemented in Mizoram for the indigenous people. He is an Englishman, English professor, literature professor, asking a question which he suggested in the way he is expecting an answer from you. That's what, how it is possible. And after that, Jonana can take over.
Okay, thank you. Yes, certainly there is much to be learned from producers in Africa, but the circumstances are so different. Even within India, we have the plains of India and the extension materials that were developed for the plains of India. They don't really translate to the hills of the Northeast. So I believe that local solutions are best, that people in a local area know their land and their water resources better than anyone, better than an outsider, and that they are in the best place to solve problems. I really appreciate the idea of doing some kind of a program in the Northeast or in the Eastern Himalayas on indigenous practices.
Yes, you can, Professor, you can plan for this kind of online training program from Minnesota itself. We can organize the farmers of Mizoram. We invite through Zoom, and we can demonstrate them this kind of training program. It may be better if we can plan that kind of training program. We can invite all farmers of Mizoram. So one Mizo translator also we can involve, and whatever it is going to be given training in English, that can be translated to Mizo, and farmers can be benefited. This is what one suggestion our group in Mizoram University, the Minnesota Collaborative Group, they can plan for this program. Maybe it is better, I think. John and Nitya and all of them, they can plan for this program. And one Professor Baburao, Masala Baburao, he was asking, just the last question from my side, Jonana, please excuse me.
Okay.
He was asking, when Zoom cultivation is being performed, what about the soil fertility? Is there any possibility that soil fertility is going to be lost because of the that is burning the crop, and that particular area is going to be, but it was the natural succession may improve the soil fertility, but actually they're asking a question like that. Is there any possibility that the soil fertility is going to be lost?
Well, we don't really have very much data in Mizoram to be able to determine that yet. So I know that Professor Lalun Moya and others have started research on that.
Yes.
But we need longer term studies under different field conditions, under different types of crops to make that kind of determination. But certainly if you have more cover on the soil, you can retain the fertility and the soil condition better than if it's bare soil. And Zooming does restore soil carbon. But we don't have any evidence that fallow cycles are shortening or that soil is being left untended. We don't have any evidence of that at all at this point. Unless others have seen that, I certainly haven't, but maybe some of the others could speak to that too. I'm certainly not the authority on on soil
Actually,
fertility.
Professor M.N.V. Prasad is posting an answer that Professor Ramakrishna has worked on this particular slashing and burning agriculture of June. From Nehu, he has worked long back. Was posting answer there, but it's okay. That we will refer that. Thank you, Dr. Jonana. You can go ahead now. There are many questions in the chat box.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, before everything, good morning, Dr. Carlin. And nice to see your sweet smile once again.
Thank you.
And then before coming to the questions which have been posted in the question and answer box, I just want to, I hope I'm not doing wrong things. I just want to, okay, yeah, let me proceed. This is your session. So the first question and answer comes from Professor Srinivas Pathi, who is from the Department of Public Administration, Mizoram University. He is greeting you first, and then he is asking that could you please highlight the best practices across the continent which you had ever come across linking with the macro or the micro farming system?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you so much for that question, sir. Yes, actually, one of the best examples that I'm aware of comes from India. And it was initiated about 15 or 20 years ago by the International Labor Organization in partnership with SEWA, which is the Self-Employed Women's Organization. It's now a national organization in India. And what they did was they worked with Dalit and untouchable communities where women had been working as prostitutes and as beady rollers and really very disadvantaged, poverty-stricken conditions. And they realized that women as individuals had very few rights, and they wouldn't be able to own property in their own names because they didn't have any resources. So the ILO organized them into groups and gave them training, and they gave them literacy and numeracy training. And over a period of a year or two, brought up their level of capacity, and then encouraged them every month to put in a little bit of money into a pot. And at the end of each month, ILO did a matching grant, so that within 6 or 8 or 10 months, they had a significant amount of money. It wasn't a requirement that each woman put in a lot of money, but just enough to keep it going. And soon, after 1 year, they had enough so that they had to protect it because it was a lot of money. So they came up with these kind of clear plastic boxes so that everybody could see how much money was in the box. And as a group, they were able to become a cooperative. Their capacity was built up to that level. They got registered as a cooperative. They were able to buy land and buy property. And then meanwhile, the Indian government, the state government worked with them to give them training. And they decided on their own that they wanted to raise silkworms and mulberry production. So they did that. And after a few years of that, they were successful. They wanted to learn how to do weaving, of silk weaving. And these organizations, now there are many of these groups, and these organizations have become very advanced. I think the program is some 30 years on at this point. And these groups have become very prosperous, very prosperous. And so that model, the SEWA model, has been taken around the world, and it's been used very widely in Africa. And it's similar to a program that local people have, indigenous people have in West Africa called a tontine. So every month you put in a little bit of money in a community, and then they randomly draw a name, and that person gets all of the money for that month. And the money is used to invest in maybe a shop or an animal or something like that. So it builds capacity and it builds wealth in communities. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, you did. So can I go to the next question, please?
Please.
So it's a question from Lalin Digiralde. From her name, I could make sure that she's from Mizoram.
Yeah.
She's asking, how could climate change affect the indigenous livelihood and farming systems?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. Thank you for that. Definitely it can, because we know that rainfall is changing, that many, many countries now are experiencing either too much rainfall or not enough. And so drought and flooding is becoming more critical. And that's happening around the world. Even here in my place right now, we are in our third week of a drought and really extremely high temperatures, and the crops now are wilting and dying. So farmers around the world are having these kinds of issues. It requires farmers to be more adaptive and nimble, in that they are going to start planting crops that are more drought tolerant and maybe faster maturing, because there's not enough, the season might change and it's not as long. In this part of the world, we get snow and ice and frost. And so our growing season is changing as well. So that means that the amount of time that you have to plant and to reap and to market is changing. So people are adapting on the run as they go. And everybody is learning about this. There's no one solution for everybody. It's all a matter of, again, of local adaptation.
Okay. Yep, that's it. Thank you for that.
Okay.
So the third question is from Dr. Tapasi Sinha. I guess Dr. Tapasi Sinha is from Assam, or yeah, he could be one of my friend, or he could be other person. So his question is about who are the indigenous people. So let me read out his question, not in toto. Migration is a common feature of human civilization. That migration, I'm sorry, let me repeat from the beginning. Migration is a common feature of human civilization, that people migrated from one state to the other with their distinct culture and languages, and stayed there for about a century. In this situation, whether their community is indigenous to which state, the place where they come from or the place where they migrated to?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. Yes, in fact, throughout the history of humanity, people have been on the move. People don't like to stay in one place very long, for more than a few generations, it seems. And this really complicates things. You know, if you've got a place where there are several different cultures all living together, they have to find a way to get along and to share the resources. I can give you an example from Ethiopia. There was a terrible famine there about 30 years ago, very, very serious famine. And Ethiopia, like Mizoram, is very hilly. Parts of it are very hilly. And farmers have adapted their seeds and their cultivation depending on which side of a hill they live on. So if their land is on the shady side of a hill, they have a certain kind of a seed that they save only for that area. But if their property or if their land is on the opposite side, the sunny side of the hill, they grow different crops. So if you have newcomers coming in who might also be indigenous, but they've been forced out because of conflict, and they now settle in this area, it means that there's land available for everybody. And the newcomers may bring in with them farming practices that are completely inappropriate for the new place where they live. So they might try to farm based on their old ways, but it's not working. But I can say that farmers are very observant, and they have had thousands of years of adaptation, and they are resourceful, and they watch each other. They often collaborate, and unless it's a situation of severe conflict, they learn from each other and they will adapt. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I should not waste my time. I should not waste the time. Let me go to the next question. It's from anonymous attendee. No name is written. So before coming to his questions, you know, there are many pros and cons about shifting cultivation. So the question is, to what extent Zoom cultivation should be justified in the context of present environmental issues?
Well, again, going back to the assumptions about Zoom, there are a lot of people that assume that it's a terrible practice and it should be eliminated. But my point of view is that's an assumption, and we don't know enough about the impacts of Zoom in any location almost to make those kinds of judgments. I mean, there are some countries where it's been studied very extensively, in Thailand and Indonesia, in Tanzania, and where it's practiced sustainably and where population growth is not excessive. It's a very efficient and sustainable way of life. However, what can throw a wrench into the works is when you have severe population growth or in-migration from other places, as in the case I mentioned in Ethiopia. So it's a matter of, I feel that everything is local. You have to understand the local context, and that if you have a sweeping generalization that Zoom is bad, it's destructive, there are always exceptions to that. And we just don't have enough information about Zoom in every circumstance to be able to make those kinds of judgments. Oh, I cannot hear you, Zonuna.
Jonana, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
I will ask, before Jonana comes, I will ask one question. Professor Emmanuel Prasad is asking, I think swine industry and nutrient recovery from rearing scene are most important for Mizoram culturally and environmentally. He is asking to comment on this.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part of the question. Could you repeat it?
I think swine industry.
Oh, swine, okay.
Swine industry and nutrient recovery from rearing swine are most important for Mizoram culturally. He was asking.
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on swine. I am not a livestock expert, but my own observation is that I understand that swine are very, very important culturally and to rural households, and that the threats to livestock really are included in swine respiratory diseases and many of the new invasive illnesses that are moving across Asia now. So if it's a closed system where you are able to rather, again, with the proviso that I'm not an expert on swine by any means, but I have seen systems, say in Southeast Asia, Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand, where pigs are confined, they are stalled as they are in Mizoram. It's a closed system so that all of the elimination from the pigs are contained and they are put into a biogas digester. And these digesters are very simple. It's just a large sheet of plastic that is rolled into a tube with hoses on either end. And so the gases are contained, the methane is contained in the tube, and then it's reused as a source of light and energy and heat. So in that kind of a system where there's adequate veterinary services and where there's not a lot of intermixing of swine herds, and where those resources can be used either on the land as manure or as a source of energy, I think it's a good thing.
Sonana, please continue.
I think Zonuna is having some network problem.
Mm,
So maybe I'll just take up some
Yes, yes.
question on behalf of him. Yeah, I think I will just take the question from which I can get in from Pranab Kalita. What is the meaning of Natlang in Mizoram tradition? I don't know, Karlin may not be able to explain this one, but maybe Dr. Tanpui can help us the meaning of Natlang in Mizo tradition.
That's just a work that is done by the community for the benefit of the society. Okay, it's where returns are not expected, and it's a work that is done for the community by the members of the community without any benefits that they expect back from that work.
All right, thank you. I think
I hope it's clear.
that's it. Yeah, it's clear enough. So the one question from Kamelikon Vidyasagar ready? KV ready? Yeah, I think he's our colleague. The question is, don't you think the researchers have practical difficulties as far as implementation of the suggestions state and governments have to undertake that responsibility?
yes. Yes and yes.
That is the practical.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it seems that in many countries, there's not much dialogue between academics and government, which is really terrible because both sides can benefit from exchange of information. And it's not only India, I think, that has this difficulty where people who are really doing good work, good research, good teaching, they're not really drawn into the policy process. There's a couple of notable exceptions in Mizoram, I know, but I think governments can learn so much from the work of faculty and students as well. And they should be applying these lessons. They should be applying the results of this research, which in many cases is funded by the government. So they can learn so much from researchers if they would just, maybe attend conferences or have some kind of a way to have a dialogue and an exchange of information.
All right, I will go to the next question. It's not really related to the presentation of tonight, but then maybe since the question has come, can you talk about rural innovation program and how it can be beneficial in northeastern states of India with the help of indigenous people? So it can be generally answered.
Thank you so much for that question. Yes. So the examples that I've seen in Mizoram seem as though they have been planned maybe in a top-down way. That's just my assumption. But when we traveled, we went to, for example, a couple of canning factories, which were idle for 10 or 11 months out of the year because there was nothing to can or nothing to process. So there was a gap between what the farmers were able to produce and an overcapacity in terms of this canning factory. And sometimes there weren't enough raw materials to put food, the canned food or the processed food, into packaging. So I feel that indigenous people need to have more voice and more involvement when these projects are imagined and when they're planned and when they're implemented and funded. You can't just have them arrive like a parachute coming in from the sky. You need to it has to be grounded in local reality. And whoever does the planning has to understand the local harvest cycles, the local marketing cycles. Again, there's a gap in communication and a gap in information between planning and local people, indigenous people. So that that's an area that has to be patched and fixed, I think.
Okay, thank you. Another question comes from Silal Engzama. Indigenous method of farming seems to be no longer sustainable. In the meantime, the government introduced a new method of farming. Please, can you suggest which method should be clinged onto?
Is the person from Mizoram or from
Yes,
some other place?
from Mizoram. From
Okay.
Mizoram.
All right. Well, I don't believe that we have enough information for one thing, and I don't think we can say that Joom is not sustainable. From our work so far, which is very preliminary, it's not, we don't have all the answers by any means, but it seems as though Joom can exist side by side with some of these more intensive systems, and that indeed many families practice both.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have a small Joom plot, and at the same time you are cultivating pumpkins, or you have a betel plantation somewhere. So it's not that these are incompatible. It doesn't have to be either or. And I think that they can coexist peacefully.
All right. Thank you for the answer. Another question comes from Lalrin Dikiralte. She is also from Mizoram. Based on your experience in Mizoram, will it be possible to strengthen or build upon Joom cultivation to suit the present needs of the people?
I like to think that it is. Again, there's so much we don't know. There are several trends going on right now. The population of Mizoram is really going up. If you look at the census data, say for the last 50 or 60 years, the growth in population is really extraordinary, as it is throughout the entire Northeast. So can Joom alone address all of the food needs and the marketing needs of the population of Mizoram? Probably not. Certainly not in rice, because Mizoram is not the kind of place where you can have very much wet rice cultivation. But I think, again, the countries where I've seen that have been successful in agriculture are those which have diversified. And you already have a very good basis for production with Joom cultivation. So why not diversify and continue to add and experiment with these additional high value crops and try growing them side by side? I'm not saying that you should just set aside Joom, but try and experiment with other crops, see what works. I mean, there's already a lot of turmeric and betel and pumpkins and squashes and so many fruits, so many things that are being grown now that I really would advocate for a diversified farming system.
All right. Thank you. I think Zonuna, Dr. Zonuna is just back. So I don't know if he can hear us. He can take up the last question posted by Prakriti Kandel. Dr. Zonuna?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible now, sir?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. The last question.
Yeah, it's a very long question. I haven't gone through yet, thinking that Professor Nite is going to take up the whole thing. The question is, it is very essential to preserve the indigenous systems and livelihood, and who more capable than the local and indigenous people themselves. But sometimes the local people are not aware enough. People tend to exploit the resources unknowingly, like it is happening in Nepal and other parts of the world as well. Infrastructures are being developed without foresightedness, means without thinking other parts of the things. I was curious to know how to raise awareness among local people and in the national level to make people aware, because the way nature is being exploited, it is very heartbreaking. Yeah, it's a question as well as it's a kind of suggestion, I could guess. So, Dr. Carlin, do you have any suggestion about this?
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you, Zanuna. This is I really believe in the power of local culture and local leaders and local elders, especially the elders. It was when we were in Mizoram doing our field work, I was so impressed just listening to the oldest people in a village. They had so much knowledge and so much memory of what life used to be like and what production used to be like. So I think, again, going back to my thinking everything is local. And in Mizoram, there's such a strong sense of local organization that you already have a wonderful infrastructure by which to pass along information. So I would just suggest build upon that. And now that the internet is becoming more widespread, even in rural areas, and with cell phone technology, I think that's a very good way to do it. We have a project in Tanzania. In fact, one of my graduate students did a study about cell phone technology and whether or not disseminating extension messages through cell phones is effective. And what we discovered was that, in fact, it's very effective, but it depends on who has the cell phone. Sometimes if there's only one cell phone in a household, and if it's in the hands of one person, that person may choose not to circulate the information. So along with the message and with the technology, you have to really push people to share their knowledge and to spread the word about an innovation that they might be interested in. But I see the opportunity for great strides in communication in rural areas as technology advances.
Thank you, Dr. Carlin. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, I received a phone call from Professor Nitya, and we left one question from Lalwat Feli from Mizoram. Her question is, what are the challenges associated with the mixed method research designs? I could guess that her question is about the sustainable agriculture and the natural resource management, the mixed method research designs for sustainable agriculture and natural resource management.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a very good question, very interesting question too. I think the main challenges would be having the resources available to train people in using mixed methods, and to be able to train not just academics, but community workers, community people at the local level who might benefit from using these technologies or these methods. And another challenge would be, so training is one, and getting the resources to do training. And then to actually conduct the training and to have people able who have done this kind of work to be able to train others in it. So it's almost a training of trainers that is needed. The second thing would be how to integrate the information that is gained from these methods at a higher level in government, to decision makers, to policy makers, and to be able to convey the needs and the constraints of local people to those who plan on their behalf.
Okay, Dr. Carlin, thank you. Many of the participants are having an upcoming webinar after this program, so I should hand over the session to Professor John.
Professor Nitya, can you please take over? Yeah, with a vote of thanks.
All right. The session has been interesting. Now we are almost 9. I'm like, more than 1.5 hours. So at this point of time, I'm very happy to get this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks, because a program without vote of thanks is not complete. So Firstly, I would like to convey our sincere gratitude to our dynamic Vice Chancellor, who has been very supportive. Sir, a big thank you for your untiring support. Thank you very much. Second, our gratitude goes to the speaker of tonight's session, Professor Carlin. Though you are a part of us, on behalf of the coordinators for tonight's session, I would like to especially convey our sincere thanks, especially for accepting our request to be one of the key speakers. Thank you very much. And it
Thank
has
you so
been
much.
interesting. Thank you. Then last but not the least, our sincere thanks goes to the participants. As our Vice Chancellor pointed out tonight, we had very eminent professors in the country and abroad who help us, to make the program successful. And we have very senior professors from JNU, from NEHU. So, sirs, thank you very much for making our program successful. And actually, you all are, qualified to be the key speakers even. But then maybe in the near future, we will have you as key speakers. Thank you very much. And all the other participants, teachers, research scholars, and students, thank you very much for making this program a success. So with this, we conclude the session, and thank you one and all.
Good night. Good night.
Yeah, good night all.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
nice
much.
day. Dr.
Thank
Kalin,
you.
have a nice day.
Thank you so
Carlin,
much.
Thank you very much, Carlin. Doctor.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Carlin, when is her birthday? Just off
Who, me?
topic. Your mom.
Oh, my mother. My
Your
mother.
mom. Yeah. When is?
July.
Yeah.
July 10th.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
We will celebrate it online.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
At Urban Growler.
Oh, yes.
Yes. We will.
Sir, her mother is turning 100 next
Mhm.
month.
100. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
100 years old. She's turning
Yeah.
her mother.
Yeah, we're having a celebration, small town by my sister's place in northern Minnesota. So it will be the local town hall, and the whole town is invited to come.
All right. All right.
So, Colin, how are you?
Oh, Kesia is
Oh,
joining.
PC, hello, how are you?
He was hiding.
So good to see you. How are you feeling? Oh, I can't hear him.
I'm very much
Are you feeling better now?
fine now.
Oh,
I
good.
eat well, I can sleep well.
Yes, that's what we need.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we needed that, because otherwise it was recorded, and so and it's going to be there on YouTube, so we needed the ending of it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Colin. It's
Yes, my
really
pleasure.
wonderful, great feedback also.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank Sir also, our Vice Chancellor,
Yes,
who
indeed.
has always been pushing us and encouraging us, supporting us, and that is why we could hold such programs today also. So
Thank you.
your efforts from both sides are highly, highly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good night all.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Everyone.
Good night.
Yeah,
Thank you
Colin,
again.
I'll get to you on WhatsApp.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night. Bye. I will end this. All right.
Yes, I'm
Nice-
just
nice to meet you.
leaving now. I'm